Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, where are Palestinians in the so-called Gaza peace plan?
Their future is being debated without them, and their sense of uncertainty and fear and exhaustion is something that we try to carry into every story.
How the U.S. plan stalled and why it may have been set up to fail from the start. I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take. Before we continue with today's show, remember to leave us a comment telling us what you think about this episode and what stories you might want to see us do next. And if you're on your favorite podcast app, please leave us a review telling us where you're listening from. And also, a 5-star rating really does help the show.
My name is Mohammed Mhawish. I'm a Palestinian journalist and writer from Gaza. I have been reporting heavily on the situation on the ground, both from inside Gaza for almost a year and a half throughout the latest Israeli war, and then continuing from exile right now where I am based in New York.
Well, Mohammed, it is great to have you on The Take. And I'd love to start there on the ground with the conditions right now in Gaza. I know they're kind of as bad as ever. This winter has already been brutal, and many Palestinians there have to suffer the elements in either tents or unsafe housing. So just to start, can you try to put into words, give us an example just how tough it is right now on the ground?
It's absolutely catastrophic right now in Gaza. The world has been celebrating a victory for peace and a ceasefire for months now. And what we're actually witnessing is something far more troubling. So for winter right now, it's incredibly harsh. Mm-hmm. And for a lot of people, it's frightening. Most of the people I know are living in tents and makeshift shelters. When the sun goes down, it gets really cold and damp. And most families simply don't have walls or heating devices or dry shelters. They're living in tents or partially destroyed homes that don't keep the rain out. So technically when it rains, everything gets soaked. Blankets, clothes, mattresses, and people wake up in water. And I have heard, from people and parents who are trying to keep children warm with whatever they can have. Sometimes just trying to burn scraps of paper just to get a little of heat. And that cold dramatically and quickly turns into a health issue. Because we're seeing more flu diseases, and children are getting sick really easily, and elderly people are struggling with these conditions. And this is happening right now across the entire Gaza Strip, where we know hospitals are overwhelmed and medicine is scarce. Yeah. I lived through it personally with my family, and I was reporting for Al Jazeera English Digital during my time in Gaza. And I remember some of the stories I reported even cited that I was reporting when I was diagnosed with acute malnutrition with my 2-year-old. Wow. And I was, going dispatched on fields and assignments, including places where truck and aides, were supposed to be coming in. And I was there for both reasons: to report, see how the situation is going to unfold, and get a bag of flour for my baby back home. Sometimes I fail, and mostly I would fail. And so that was the reality. And then even from afar right now, having family, friends, colleagues, neighbors, everyone I know is still there. We're still trapped in the same emotional weight, if not more, because we can't help. All we can do is just make them try to feel like they're heard, they're there, they're here with us as well, and we try to make life better for them. Have we succeeded? We're trying. I mean, it's just as tough.
Malnutrition and a 2-year-old is enough to stop anybody in their tracks. To have anything else on your mind, it would never happen for any parent.
Yeah, he's 4 now. He was 2 and I think 2.5 when he was diagnosed with acute malnutrition with me, because we literally didn't have anything to eat. And I would just try to sanitize through my hands some towels and water, which was contaminated for him to be able to sleep at the time. And we were living in a school shelter after my house was bombed in December 2023. That was the day-to-day operation. alongside reporting responsibilities and coverage demands. And so it was basically the reality for so many right now who carry on the same legacy, journalists.
Mohammed, can I just ask you practically, just because I know there's a ton of parents and I know this is difficult, but what is it like when a 2-year-old is acutely malnourished?
They get to the point where they stop asking for food and water, and all they want to do is just sleep. But they don't. You don't want them. You don't want them to sleep because it might be their last time. They're going to bed. So you keep them wet. You keep some water. On their face, whether it's contaminated, it's clean, or it's not, just to make sure like they're being able to breathe within the vicinity of something wet, something hydrated. You try to make up any sort of food possible around, whether it's crumbs of bread or dated canned foods or anything you could possibly find just to make their stomachs get busy. But it's only a matter of distraction. You can only distract their bodies and minds, but you can never feed them in a way that makes them feel full. They wake up during the night crying, asking for something, but they don't know what it is they're asking for or what they're struggling from. And so it is really heart-wrenching for a parent to witness this kind of stage for their children to be living through.
Mohammed, this fills me with sadness and absolute white-hot rage, because the headlines, the antiseptic headlines, like Israel has blocked aid going into Gaza for 3 months, does not capture what you just told me, which is that means practically hundreds of 2-year-olds just want to sleep and are no longer asking for food.
There's huge parts in Gaza right now that are hovering near famine, even during so-called ceasefire. And we're talking about 2 million people on the verge of collapse. Some of them have collapsed without any housing possibilities, without any medical assistance, without any healthcare, without any education. So it's totally in destruction, in ruins. That's what we're living through. So yeah, it is, aid and food and access to, critical assistance is just one aspect of what the people are going through. Winter, as we described, is another harsher reality that they have to grapple with at the same time. I've experienced what it means to live in a tent in the winter of 2024, during January and during February and during December 2023, after my house was destroyed. And I kept running from one makeshift shelter to another, just for warmth, for safety, for security, just to keep my family just afloat and survive. And there's nothing you could do. You just keep exploring options. And you just keep experimenting. Would this piece of metal or clothing would work and prevent water from dripping on our heads as we sleep? Would this piece of blanket be sufficient to keep water afar? It's a piece of blanket. It doesn't protect from the cold. It doesn't protect from debris or shrapnel. And so I think what makes this winter especially cruel is that it's completely avoidable, I guess. But the world has been watching and celebrating a so-called ceasefire right now, but it has continued the struggle for so many inside Gaza, but in different shape and format.
Let's talk about that, because it's now been almost 3 months since U.S. President Donald Trump stood shoulder to shoulder with world leaders in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, under this huge banner declaring peace in the Middle East. He announced this to, a much heralded 20-point peace plan, which was really, in fact, a prisoner exchange and a ceasefire in Gaza. Now, you've written that it is no surprise that the peace plan has stalled. What makes you say that?
I think we have to consider the major design flaws in the peace plan, because its architects built contradictions into its foundation, whether intentionally or not. And considering the sequencing of the plan, we have, first of all, phase 1, which establishes a yellow line that gives Israel control of more than half of Gaza. And then comes phase two that demands Hamas disarm before any further Israeli withdrawal happens. For now, Hamas won't disarm because, from their perspective, doing so would mean accepting permanent Israeli military dominance over Palestinian territory. And so the group views armed resistance as a right under international law, and they see this plan as an attempt to strip that away while Israel maintains what they call operational freedom to strike whenever it wants. Meanwhile, I think Israel has made clear through both rhetoric and action that they have no intention of ceding meaningful control. Prime Minister Netanyahu, for example, talks about voluntary migration, and his coalition partners talk openly about resettlement in Gaza. And the military facts on the ground inside Gaza, in terms of what I'm seeing and reporting on, show an entrenchment, not withdrawal.
Recently, we did an episode about armed militias that are sprouting up all over Gaza. What would actually happen if Hamas disarmed tomorrow? I mean, what would that do to the security situation? Can Gaza even survive Hamas disarming at the moment?
I think it's a question of who's running next. And what we have on the ground right now are basically actors that have no local consent. They're not being called in by the public, and they're being assembled and designed by totally external powers. Politically speaking, disarmament would also create a huge power vacuum inside Gaza.
Yeah.
And so the question immediately becomes who governs, who provides security, who represents the people. And without a credible political process, so disarmament could only lead to chaos and not stability.
We'll have more with Mohammed after this break. So one of the legacies of that Sharm el-Sheikh meeting is the so-called yellow line that you mentioned. That's what's dividing Gaza at the moment.
Yeah.
On one side, you have the red zone, which is controlled by Hamas. The other side is the green zone, which is controlled by Israel. So, like, what happens to Palestinians who are displaced from the other side of the yellow line? Like, what happens to their property, their homes?
I think simply the line creates a three-tier system. The green zone, which is roughly a third of Gaza, hugging the eastern perimeter, it's where reconstruction should be permitted and authorized in later stages. But permitted here needs unpacking. Foreign contractors can work there, but under supervision by both the International Stabilization Force, which is to be assembled on the ground, and the Israeli military. Technically, Israel retains what amounts to veto power over what infrastructure gets rebuilt in those areas, which means every school, every hospital, every water treatment facility, for example, has to pass Israeli security approval. And then comes the red zone that encompasses about half of Gaza and includes places like Jabalia and parts of the southern tips of Gaza like Khan Yunis, which are the parts that are most densely populated neighborhoods, where hundreds of thousands of people lived before October 7th, 2023. The plan now explicitly states that rebuilding there is contingent on meeting security demands, like verified disarmament of armed factions in Gaza, stable patrol routes, cleared supply corridors. And given that Hamas and other Palestinian factions in Gaza have flatly rejected disarmament, and given the complete political deadlock, there is no scenario in the foreseeable future, I think, where those conditions get met, which means the plan has written off half of Gaza's most populated areas indefinitely. And now we're witnessing a stalled plan with a very huge potential that war is probably coming back. We have seen Prime Minister Netanyahu stating that he's allowing a 2-month period of time for Palestinian factions to disarm. So in these 2 months, probably, if the terms were not met, there is potential and there is the possibility that Israel is going to be resuming strikes, which hasn't stopped, like, technically.
Yeah, right. We've seen, almost 1,000 violations of the ceasefire in 3 months. So the idea that there's peace in the Middle East or a ceasefire at all is a fiction in itself. So Mohammed, maybe we can just zoom in a little bit. And I want to know about how this is affecting you personally. I know you've written beautifully about how your family and your friends are surviving each day in Gaza under just these unimaginable conditions. But you've also written about what it feels like to live inside the fishbowl and under this kind of constant surveillance by the Israeli military and its government. So can you share some of that experience? Help us understand just how severe that surveillance is.
In my reporting recently for New York Magazine, I documented how Israel built a surveillance machine in Gaza that goes far beyond traditional military intelligence and makes up space for AI-driven systems that turn Gaza into data collection points and targeting apparatus. We have seen through previous reporting systems like Lavender, for example, that generated tens of thousands of targets using algorithms that analyzed phone data, movement patterns, and social connections and financial transactions. And I think here, the zonal map requires surveillance to function right now in the aftermath of the war, during the ceasefire. Speaking on the reality right now, I think the security situation determines access and communications and even whether it's safe to speak to people openly. And so families who I have been in touch with, they worry about what comes next. Is it going to be back to retaliation and instability, or is it going to be a status where they're going to be left unprotected? And that tension, I think, shows up in every conversation I have. We're speaking to people who feel their future is being debated without them, and their sense of uncertainty and fear and exhaustion is something that we try to carry into every story. And so, in short, I think it affects everything. Israel has the control and the ability to listen to phone calls and monitor people's movement and communications and social fabric. So it affects access, safety, trust. And so reporting here means working under constant uncertainty. At a time we're seeing political decisions immediately translate into fear on the ground.
I mean, it's all part of the same strategy, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Israel has total dominion over every single aspect of your life, from what you eat to who you talk to. This is part of the plan to make it unlivable, and it's working.
It is working. The zonal map, for example, requires surveillance to function. Every checkpoint between the green and red zones, for example, and every reconstruction project in permitted areas, every aid shipment, all of it requires monitoring, verification, and tracking. And Israel has collected biometric data on thousands of people from Gaza during the war, like through facial recognition scans, iris scans from mass detentions. That data hasn't disappeared. It's getting into use right now during times of calm, supposedly. And it becomes the foundation for controlling movement under this new system. The ISF, for example, will need these systems to patrol zones. The Board of Peace will need data to verify what benchmarks are being met. And what, in the meantime, Israel is insisting to maintain what it calls operational freedom, which means retaining the intelligence architecture to conduct those strikes that have killed hundreds of people since the ceasefire began. Personally speaking, what I have found reporting this is that Palestinians are living in a state of total information asymmetry. The people are being watched constantly, but they can't see the criteria being used against them. They don't know what makes them a target. Being near the wrong person in the wrong building, showing the wrong pattern of movement, any of this can get people flagged or killed. And that's how high the stakes are. There is no transparency in that either. There is no appeal. There is no way to know that, like, they have been designated a threat until a missile hits. And the ceasefire, including the plan moving forward, they have just normalized this. We're moving from surveillance used in warfare to ceasefire population control. And the systems are the same.
All right. So, Mohammed, Donald Trump repeatedly emphasized that the U.S. and Israel are actually helping the people of Gaza.
We've all agreed that supporting Gaza must be done to lift up the people themselves, but we don't want to fund anything having to do with bloodshed, hatred, or terror, as has happened in the past.
But at the moment, it seems that Palestinians in Gaza have almost no agency, no say in what will happen. Now, you were born and raised there in Gaza. You've written about your life before Israel's genocidal war on Gaza. You wrote about your grandmother's stories about the scent of jasmine in the air. You've written about the memory of that place, the taste of the olives, the sound of prayers. How do Palestinians who are still living in Gaza wrestle with what to do, how to reclaim their sense of place, but also do what's best for their families because it is unlivable?
I think the option through all of this, for me and for so many in Gaza right now, is to live through it. I don't think we have been able to resettle or wrestle with that. I think we have adapted to the sense of fear, displacement, survival mechanism on a daily basis. And I think we have no choice. What that looks like on the ground for people and families, including family of my own who's still there. The idea of rebuilding something out of the destruction is just enough to survive. But it doesn't provide a sense of comfort or peace or quiet. I've seen people put up temporary shelters, and at the end of the day, they call it home, even though they know they might have to leave them again. And I lived through this personally when I lived with my son and parents in makeshift shelters and schools, and we would wonder how long we're going to last here before we have to get on the run again. And so life resumes in fragments. We try to work when possible. Students try to study when possible. And so we're taking it and planning it day by day. And that's the reality right now for people, because there is, also the emotional adjustment. And people have come to learn that they have to lower their expectations. They stop talking about stability or normalcy, and they start to focus on endurance.
Yeah.
They try to keep their families together. They try to stay healthy. They try to get through the next winter or the next escalation. But it's important also to say this adaptation shouldn't be the norm.
Yeah.
People learn how to live under these conditions, but they don't believe in them. Neither did I, and that's why the need and the urge pushed me out of Gaza for safety. As a journalist, I was reporting from the ground and I was taking care of my family, but I couldn't keep both my life and my story. I think what we see here is resilience on the surface, but underneath it, there is big unresolved trauma. People survive, yes, but they don't feel settled and they don't feel secure.
Okay. Well, Mohammed, thank you so much for sharing these stories. Thank you for reporting, and thank you for coming on The Take.
Of course, thank you so much, Kevin. It's an honor.